All right, guys, this is Shanji Bear. One more Shanji Talks, and today, definitely a very special edition. As I'm telling you guys, this is organic. We just literally sat down for a lunch, and now we're having coffee on his temple. I'm here with the starter, I could say the creator of a legacy, and not too many people know about the original Lovato. And I'm here to talk to you guys, introduce you, which I kindly call him Papa. Not too many people. I give that he does speak Spanish, he does speak Portuguese, and I'm here to introduce to my channel for you that haven't, never had a chance to learn from him and the story. Rafael Lovato Senior. Papa,
Thank you
that's
so much.
very good
Thank you.
to have you here and with us.
Thank you. It's an honor to have you here.
Yeah, so that's a lot of stories. Basically, gonna talk a little bit about your upbringings, how martial arts came to you. So Papa, people that don't know you, tell us where you from. Like you have a Spanish background. Can you talk a little bit about how
Yes.
your family got to America?
Yes. Well, as far as I know, my mother has shown me pictures, but my great grandfather came from Extremadura, Spain, which is in southwest Spain. It's one reason why we're so light complected. My mother has green eyes and freckles, and she's a wonderful lady. She's still very, very healthy, getting around very well, thank God. But on my father's side, Lovato, of course, is actually an Italian name.
It's Italian name.
Yes, I
Okay.
remember when
So it's not Brazilian, it's Italian.
Italian. But when Rafael and I went to Italy and we got to teach there together, had a great time. Everywhere we went it was, hey, paisan, hey, sono italiano. And everybody's like, Lovato. So we had a great time there. But yeah, I come from a Spanish and Italian background. My hometown is Chicago. And I grew up there, and Chicago is where I fell in love with martial arts originally. And really, originally, it was out of necessity because unfortunately, we grew up in a very, very rough area. Sadly, my father died when I was just a baby. I was only 9 months old, and he was killed in an automobile accident. And so it was just my mother and I for 5 years before she finally remarried. But I started martial arts. I fell in love with boxing, and I remember as a kid boxing all the time in Chicago when I was very, very young. I was about probably 9 years old at the time. And then at 14, I got involved in traditional martial arts because that's pretty much all that was
So
available.
you were born in Chicago, but
No,
where
actually, I was born in Albuquerque, New Mexico.
Albuquerque, New Mexico.
Yes.
So how did your parents? So you're born in Albuquerque, New Mexico, and then your dad passed.
And then my mother and I went to Chicago.
So why did your mother move to Chicago?
Well, she was only 18 when my father died, and I think she just wanted to get away from there, get a completely different start. Her brother was in Chicago at the time, and he told her, "Hey, come to Chicago. We'll get you'll be able to get work." And so that's why we went to Chicago.
So because she had family there.
Yes, she did have family there already. So I was a baby when we went to Chicago. That's why, for me, my hometown will always be Chicago.
Chicago. And like growing up, you went to school. How was growing up? Because Chicago is been known for being like a tough city. I think even the movie Batman is it's kind of like the idea is Chicago, right?
Gotham City. Yes.
Gotham City. So let's go before martial arts. How was Rafael Lovato, as a young kid going to school? What was that for you? Like how did that impact your life until the point you first looked to a martial arts school?
Well, I have to say, in all honesty, the one word that comes to my mind from back then is violence. Chicago, and especially in my neighborhood, was very, very violent. There were street gangs everywhere. And unfortunately, I hate to say it, and Rafael makes fun of me sometimes. Dad, you focus so much on the self-defense and on the valetudo aspect, but people weren't raised like you. And I'm like, well, I'm glad they weren't, because
definitely.
for me, going to school, I literally at most of the time would run to school, and I would run home, and because there were people you had to watch out for, certain gangs, and then where I lived was predominantly Hispanic. There was a lot of Puerto Rican kids, Mexican kids, but just a couple of blocks away, literally about 2 blocks away, was all black. So, and back then in the 1960s, of course, there was always a conflict with the white kids, the black kids, or the Hispanic kids.
So, like the cultural conjuncture, like the cultural idea of America in the 1960s. You see today, with a lot of over the head, like left, right, Republicans and things. What was America in a way? Because now you have a very like the blacks, Hispanic, the whites. Was that affecting the culture, and that's why it was so violent?
Back then, yes, it had a lot to do with it. Although I had many friends that were white kids. My neighborhood at one time was Polish.
Oh wow!
And then it was slowly transforming into a Hispanic neighborhood. So I had, in fact, my very first girlfriend that I had a crush on was a little blonde, blue-eyed Polish girl. And and my mother, we had black friends. We never discriminated against anyone. It was never in our family. But sometimes, things would happen. But the irony of it is, if there weren't white kids or black kids or some other kind of kids to fight with, then we would just fight with each other. It was just violence was just a daily occurrence. And
like the anxiety, the whole that's the very common thing. The environment makes who you are. So
Yes.
you always have your guard up.
always,
You know
always
what I
had
mean?
to, always.
And like even sometimes making a joke with your friends could be seen as,
it could
as
turn ugly.
offensive.
Yeah, it could turn ugly. Yeah.
All right. So then violence and all of that, and then you found your first love, which was boxing.
Yes,
How
boxing
did-
was my first love.
How did that happen? Like the whole story, you walk in the thing, see people boxing, and how did that? Did you get okay? Did you get beat up first and like, oh, I gotta do something about it, or was just like, man, if I don't do something, I might be in trouble.
Yeah, I got beat up a lot. But I did my share of beating up too. But honestly, it happened through one of my great heroes of all time, and that was Muhammad Ali. And
What year is this now?
I'm talking like the mid-60s, 65, 66.
Okay.
I remember watching Muhammad Ali, and I lived to watch him box. And I would imitate him, his footwork, his boxing skill. And the man really had he had great boxing, but he was known for his jab.
Yeah.
And his jab was so fast and so beautiful. And so really, it was my two great heroes growing up when I was a kid was Muhammad Ali and Bruce Lee. And so it was because of that admiration for Muhammad Ali that I eventually got involved in boxing, plus just self-preservation.
Okay. So how was your first class? How can you describe to us? Because a lot of things that we talk about when people go to a martial arts school today, right? Today is more like you watch UFC, you watch Joe Rogan, you want to do something fun, you want to be part of a culture. In your case, it was plain survival, right? And I think even today, which sometimes I can't relate because when I walk in the jiu-jitsu gym, it's intimidating.
It can
Like
be,
today, even today, the schools are clean, everyone's nice, the gis are all the same. It doesn't sound too intimidating. But going to a boxing school in Chicago, which I imagine was not a commercial. People were there to learn how to be fighters.
Yes.
So that means if someone walks in, like let's say if there's another kid, now the kid could see you as someone that could take his position, right? Am I correct?
It could
if I do that analogy. So how was it? You walked in and how was that feeling? So someone that's watching us that maybe doesn't do jiu-jitsu, like what was the threshold to create courage to jump in and learn something?
Well, it can be very, very intimidating, especially when you see a bunch of kids that are, they're tougher than you, they're better than you, and they're hungry. And but I remember my first formal boxing class was just nothing but jabs, nothing but the jab. I had a jab over and over and over, and then the coach says, "Okay, now you jab the body," and I'm bored to death with just throwing jabs, but I appreciated the fact that there was a lot more to it than just throwing your hand out there. The position of the shoulder, how you bring your hand back, the footwork, stepping in with the jab, stepping back with the jab, jabbing off their jab. It's a very, very intricate and very technical science. That's why it's called the sweet science. But it could be very, very intimidating, especially when you're putting the gloves on for the first time with some tough, in my case, tough Puerto Rican kid. But he and I became good friends, and he used to beat me up all the time until one day I said, you know what? the name of the game in boxing is get hit, try not to get hit, but you will get hit no matter how good you are. So I just said, forget it. And I remember once I changed my mentality about being a victim and being his punching bag, the next thing I know, I had him bloodied up, and he looked at me like, where'd that come from, man? Who's this guy? And I remember he never had his way with me again. But a lot of it is just about attitude. Just like in Jiu-Jitsu, you say, you know what? Man, today I'm going to be the hammer, or I'm not going to let this happen, or so-and-so always passes my guard or always sweeps me. Well, I'm not going to let it happen today. There's a lot about being said about having that willpower to just impose yourself, your own game on the other person.
So, did you get to compete as a boxer?
No, I never really competed. I just did it for the pure love of it. But I did
survival.
Survival. But I did a lot of boxing on the street.
Okay.
And
so now, as a career, of course, I'm not here talking about we're gonna learn something and go use in the street. So at this point, again, this is all the curiosity. I'm not telling you guys go learn boxing, go try in the street. So now you're just surviving, you get into fights, and now you do have a skill, okay? Today, I think there's a lot of tools for you to avoid fighting, right? But I don't think that time, the way you described the culture, there was no other way, right?
No.
You know, if you run, you're just gonna have to run further. Next thing I know, you're away from home, you can't go back home. So what was the first time where you stand in front of a guy that wanted to go against you, and I'm like, I have a skill, I have training, and I'm just gonna hit him enough or not to have him stop doing this?
You know, it's funny you asked that question, because I remember the first time there was a big Puerto Rican kid.
The Puerto Ricans are on to you. Huh?
There's a lot of them in Chicago, and they are tough. But it's a big Puerto Rican kid, and he was picking on me. He used to pick on me all the time. And one day I just said, you know what? Today's the day. It's not going to happen again.
So you brought that attitude.
Yes, and I remember he laid into me, and I let him have it. And the next thing I do it, I'm actually doing vale-tudo. I didn't know it was called vale-tudo, but I got mounted on him. We fell to the ground. I got mounted on him, and I was just ground and pounding. Oh, wow. And it took several, like 5 kids to pull me off of him. Oh, wow. But after that, never again. The thing of it was, I never looked for violence. To tell you the truth, I was just a scared little kid in Chicago. But you know, I was like a minnow in a sea full of sharks. But the thing of it is, if you turn away from it, then you're always picked on. You're always going to be a victim. But in this case, the guy never messed with me, and very few others ever messed with me again.
So speaking on bullying, right? Of course, I'm trying to do parallels with the world today, right? So a lot of times in bullying school is the recurring, right? It's a guy that looks at you, and then he beats you, he embarrasses you, until one day you decide to stand up for yourself. Was this a recurring kid, or something just happened?
It happened all the time. In my neighborhood, in my school, it happened all the time. The teachers were just as tough. Oh, wow. The teachers didn't put up with anything back then. There was corporal punishment. I remember one time a kid coming into school, coming in class late, mouthing off to the teacher. The teacher grabbed him by the throat and threw him out of the classroom. Oh, wow. Literally, just threw him out of the classroom physically. Oh, wow. And we all looked at each other like, well, we're going to be on time, but we're not going to mess with Mr. Blazak, who's a big Polish guy, teacher that I had. And this is in Catholic school, by the way.
Oh, wow.
I did go to public school, but I also went 5 years to Catholic school.
Well, we're going to tune in that. Wasn't the Catholic school that all the love, which we're going to talk a little bit, the music came in the Catholic school?
Yes.
Okay, we're going to talk about that. So, boxing. Is music, so when was your next, let's say, Professor, Lovato, he's very known for his self-defense, vale-tudo approach, because that's how he learned it. And of course, we're going to touch on how he started all of that. So what was your next after boxing? Was music, or what was the first art after? Was Taekwondo? How did that happen? I want to touch it. Now you learn the grit, the courageous Lovato that had to learn something so you could survive. Now, what was the next step that now made you create art, right? Because now you're a creator in that point now.
Well, it's funny because when I was in parochial school, back in those days, girls were not allowed to be acolytes or work on be an altar boy. That's why that phrase, altar boy. Back then it was all boys.
Okay.
And I had two choices in school. I could either be an altar boy or be in the choir. And I was terrified of being an altar boy, man, because I knew I would do something stupid. I'd drop the wine. I'd step on the priest.
Maybe God will not let you get back in.
I knew the priest would end up, backhanding me or something.
Because at the time, like you get beat up on your hands, and that was physical.
Yeah.
That was physical.
Oh, yeah. It was rough
consequences.
back then.
Okay.
Yeah. So I decided to join the choir. And so when I joined the choir, I'll never forget, it was a nun that was our choir director. And I remember watching her. Of course, we had to go to class. There was a regular class. But then for the Mass, she would direct us, and we were way up in a choir loft. She would direct us, and I became mesmerized by watching her play the organ. Her feet would flow across the pedals, her hands, and then she'd be directing, playing at the same time, and it fascinated me. It absolutely fascinated me. And that's when I fell in love with classical music.
So you fell in love with classical music.
Yes. Yes.
From survive the streets of Chicago to play an organ?
Well, no, the thing of it, that's not the whole story. I actually didn't start studying music until much later.
Oh, wow.
Because
you just admire the sound.
I admired the sound. I loved it. But the thing of it is, in my neighborhood, boys didn't play pianos or organs or classical music. That could get you killed.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
So that's why I stuck to boxing and then eventually got involved in traditional martial arts.
Okay, when you talk about traditional martial arts, now what made you go to what we call, and you can tell our viewers what's considered traditional martial arts, and how did you get involved with that?
Well, when I was a boy, of course, it was 1965 when the Green Hornet first came out. And I remember my mother telling me, hey, Kato's going to be on, because up until that time, there had been trailers or commercials about the Green Hornet, Kato, his sidekick. And I watched him move, and I was mesmerized by watching him, almost as much as I was with the music. And so it was really, I remember when the Green Hornet program came on, that I knew I had to study martial arts. But back then, in those days, it was primarily the traditional martial arts like Taekwondo, karate, kung fu, judo.
Okay.
And so I was able to get involved in Taekwondo.
Taekwondo, okay.
Now, believe it or not,
so Taekwondo was before. Well,
yes.
That's new.
I had a friend that studied Taekwondo, and he and I used to spar all the time and basically just beat each other up. And I remember he took me to the martial arts school, the Taekwondo school. And this is a true story. He introduced me to the instructor. His name was Dwayne Worley, Mr. Worley. I'll never forget him. And of course, I was a very cocky, arrogant kid back then, fresh, my neighborhood in Chicago. And I told him, I said, yeah, my name is Rafael Lovato. I want to do this Taekwondo stuff. Give me a year and I'll be better than anyone here.
Oh, wow.
I said that. And the instructor, Mr. Worley, looked at me, and for a minute I thought he was going to hit me and tell me to get out, kick me out. But he looked at me real serious, then all of a sudden he broke into a laugh and he said, prove it.
Wow.
I'll never forget, he said, prove it. About a year later, I was, in fact, I became one of the enforcers.
Oh, wow.
And I was there, like the first one there, the last one to leave. I was a martial arts addict back then.
Wow.
But it was eventually that I was able to, my real goal was to go to California and study with Bruce Lee, but sadly he died. But I got to do the next best thing. I got to study and train with most of his good friends and students like Dan Lasano, Richard Bastille, Dan Lee, Ted Wong, Jerry Poteet, all those guys.
So you went from so at boxing, did you already knew about Bruce Lee?
Yes, and that's why I kind of shifted from the boxing to the martial arts.
So then you went to Taekwondo, and then Taekwondo said, now I understand all martial arts. So so Taekwondo, it's very structured, right? I would believe
structured.
way more structured than like a boxing school, right? Boxing school, you go from like, that tough, dirty, little bloody thing to more something rigid.
Yes.
How did you adapt to that? Was that something that in the end you were like eager to be part of? As something that really ground you, or did you like, because you came with the attitude like, I'm going to be the best.
Yes.
But now, for you to be the best, you got to line up, you got to follow a path. How did that incorporate to you as a person as well?
Well, there was a lot of structure, but Mr. Worley was a very, very innovative man.
Okay.
And I remember he encouraged me to be creative. And in fact, he even let me take my boxing gloves to the school.
Whoa, whoa.
And I actually put the gloves on with some of the guys there. And I remember he had like very advanced students, and I was beating them up. Because one thing with Taekwondo, no disrespect to Taekwondo, but have you ever tried backing up? Tried kicking, backing up? You can't do it. So what I would do, I would use my boxing. I would make them back up. I'd be in their face, just throwing short hooks, uppercuts, and they couldn't kick. So I took them out of their game.
Yeah.
But he was really cool about that. He encouraged me to be a complete martial artist, not just a specialist. So back at that time, this is something you probably don't know either, Shanji, is that I actually got a brown belt and studied Japanese Jiu-Jitsu.
Okay.
And that was my first introduction to Jiu-Jitsu because they taught Taekwondo and Jiu-Jitsu.
Oh, wow.
But it was Japanese Jiu-Jitsu, and it was all oriented towards self-defense. In fact, when we tested for belts, we actually had a fight. I mean, it got bloody, it got serious.
Oh, wow.
But they might throw a glass of water in your face and 3 guys attack you. You had to fight your way out of that.
Oh, sweet.
And it was, it was pretty hardcore.
So, and then how going to California came about?
I was, by this time, of course, I'm married, and Cindy and Rafael is just a little boy.
Oh,
and,
so we jumped that far?
Yes, we jumped that far before I got to go to California
All
and
right,
meet
so
Dan Inosanto.
now you're a disciplined man.
Yes.
You're in school. How did mama came to your life?
Oh, my goodness. We met, actually, I had a friend that was in the martial arts in Oklahoma City, and he invited me to come and visit him.
Oh, so you're in Chicago, and that's how Oklahoma came to your life.
It was through another martial artist friend of mine.
Okay.
And eventually I met Cindy, and then I actually lived here for a short time, and but Cindy and I, we had kind of a tumultuous romance, kind of off and on again, but here we are. This August will be 44 years that we've been married.
Well, it's basically my whole age. So you've been married my whole life.
Yes. So we got together, but we moved to Cincinnati because I went to the University of Cincinnati. And it was there that I got to train at the Cincinnati Kali Academy.
Oh, okay.
And eventually get my certification. I made a really good friend. His name is Eldon Clem, who trained in California, in Los Angeles for years with Dan Onosano, Richard Basile. And he took me under his wing. And it was eventually through that meeting that I got to go to Los Angeles, California, and meet Richard Basile and all those guys.
Oh, wow. So tell me about true martial artists, boxing, surviving to boxing to discipline to now a married man with a kid. And now the part that, our viewers want to know. How did Jiu-Jitsu came about and basically took over?
Well, I was at an instructors conference in Los Angeles, and Richard Basile would have various instructors as guest instructors. And one time,
year is
this is 91, I guess, 91, 92.
Okay.
And he had these interesting group. They were brothers. And I found out later on as they came in and introduced themselves was Carlos, Hegan, and Roger Machado. And they taught a class, and then they sparred with every one of us.
Oh, wow.
And we all felt like pretzels when they got done with us. There was nothing we could do. They just tied us up in knots, and everybody's just tapping left and right. And I said to myself, I've got to learn this. I've got to learn this. And so I became acquainted with Carlos Machado. He was very gracious, very kind, invited me to his school in Redondo Beach on the Pacific Highway, the Pacific Coast Highway, and went there and did some classes, met Renato Magna and Jean-Jacques, and that was my first introduction to Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Up until that time, I had heard a little bit about it, and it intrigued me, and the fighter in me was questioning, I've got to learn more about this, and when I had that opportunity, I was really excited about it.
And it is what, 1991, 1992?
Yeah, so about 92, 93, something like that.
And then, so when the first UFC came out, you already trained with the Machados?
The first UFC, no, but by the second one, yes.
Okay. So, and that's another interesting story because, Professor Lovato, he's one of the original ones, right? Like there's not many. It's either Brazilians, and that was about it.
There are a few Americans, like Chris Howder, I knew, Bob Bass. I remember them. In fact, I've been to Chris's house hanging out with him. Bob Bass was always very, very nice to me, who now just got his curl belt, curl and white belt. And super nice guys, but a lot of those guys I got to meet. I've trained with all the Gracies, pretty much all the Machado brothers, many, many others that I've been very fortunate to meet and train with. Hickson back in the day when he was teaching his own classes, Draculino, oh my goodness, it just goes on and on. I would go back to LA for a week at a time, 2 weeks
so
at a
right
time.
now you're in Cincinnati. At this point, okay, and then you would go back and forth to just learn Jiu-Jitsu?
Actually, we were in Cincinnati, but then we moved back here to Oklahoma City. So from Oklahoma City, I would go to LA and train.
Driving or flying?
I did fly. Surprise, surprise. I know I hate to fly, but I did fly a couple of times, but most of the time I would drive.
Well, interesting story. Professor Lovato does not like flying.
I hate flying.
Maybe he beat the whole Chicago gang, but he would not go in a plane. So one thing that always amazes me about the beginning of Jiu-Jitsu is how much people really believed in it and went above and beyond. I had in the program, in Portuguese, of course, Rodrigo Pagani, he tells a story how he would drive each way an hour and a half, 2 hours to go train with Saulo. He would take a bus, a boat, a train.
Oh
it was ridiculous. And now you're talking about you want to learn something when there's no black belts.
Yes.
And you're in Oklahoma City. So how went from learning Jiu-Jitsu to then like, you know what, I have all the experience, I want to empower people to this. Can you go through the creation of Lovato Jiu-Jitsu?
Back in those early days, it was tough because what Rafael, and by this time, Rafael was really hooked on Jiu-Jitsu as well. And he's only like 9, 10 years old at the time. So what he and I would do is we would train together, and we would study techniques. I bought every VHS tape that there was out there.
Do you guys know what VHS is? Yeah. Google it.
And any book, any literature, anything at all, we bought it. I would go to every seminar. If it was wherever it was, I would go there. And we were learning, and we would study the technique. We would practice it. We would just do our best to drill over and over. And then one day I get a phone call. It was from Carlos Machado, and he says, "Hey, Rafael, I'm moving to Dallas, Texas."
Oh wow!
And because it was really through his friendship with Chuck Norris, and Chuck Norris brought him out to Dallas. When he came to Dallas, a lot of people don't know this, but I drove every Thursday for 6 years. I would get up like 4:30 in the morning and have a little something to eat, and I would drive to Dallas, which is only 3 hours, which is a lot closer than Los Angeles, but still, I would do a private lesson with him. I would do his beginning class, and then he would allow me to do his advanced class. And then, back then, he was single. We would invariably have lunch together, him, me, some of the guys, and I just picked his brain. I took notes. I would come back, share it, and teach my own class, and I would share it with Rafael.
At this time, Lovato Jiu-Jitsu already existed.
Yes, I started the school, but back then it was actually...
What belt were you when you started?
I was a white belt. I was a white belt, but the thing is, I wasn't teaching Jiu-Jitsu.
But
I was teaching JKD.
Okay, so you're a black belt, let's say, in the other arts.
Yes.
So your first school was basically a traditional martial arts school.
No, it wasn't traditional. We were JKD school.
JKD.
So
okay,
it
so
was very untraditional. Yeah,
okay.
Jeet-Kune-Do.
So it was a Jeet-Kune-Do school. So it was Lovato Vale already.
We call it MAI, Martial Arts International.
MAI was a Jeet-Kune-Do system.
Jeet-Kune-Do, yes.
Did you teach boxing?
Yes, boxing was a part of a curriculum.
So like Jeet-Kune-Do was like the baseline, but you still did boxing and other things.
Yes,
okay.
Yes, absolutely. And then I remember once I got my blue belt, I think I got my blue belt, and I was the first blue belt in Oklahoma. And became the first black belt here. But I remember asking Master Machado, I asked him first if I could have permission to say that I taught Jiu-Jitsu. And he graciously gave me permission to do that. But back then it was tough because Oklahoma is known for a lot of wrestlers. and we had wrestlers coming in all the time. And getting on the ground as just a new, fresh blue belt, sparring with these guys, you know, and gaining their respect, it was like the Wild West.
That was the Gracie Challenge
In Oklahoma.
in the Oklahoma level.
Yes.
You know, super interesting. And you know, now you have a jiu-jitsu curriculum, you know, which eventually, of course, now Lovato Jiu-Jitsu is run by Rafael.
Yes.
So when does that little switch came? You know, you're even mentioning that, like, even, you know, when you retire from teaching, the school, the Living the Life school, there was 80% still self-defense, 20% competition. You know, how did that evolved into having a more solid grappling program? Was it because you were inspired by Rafael, or just naturally happened that way?
It naturally happened because I realized too that the way to really get good in jiu-jitsu was to compete and to lead by example. Back then we were more of a Vale Tudo school, but I encouraged all my students to at least try competition because there's something about getting out there against someone you don't know their game, anything can happen, and of course you have a certain set of rules, but it's good to test yourself in that situation. And then Rafael really took to competition, much more than I did. And back then I really didn't compete that much because I was running the school.
But to that, Rafael did boxing with you.
Oh, yes.
He did
Yes.
all that thing. He was a Golden
Yes.
Globes.
Yes.
And stuff like that. So the passion, you know, was still passed upon, you know, the family. But there's
Yes.
always like, I think I feel more comfortable here, right?
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
so now you have, you know, your little protege, which is Rafael. Now I saw your documentary, your little, I think it's on your Instagram, that you visit your schools. You know what I mean? Can you go, like, now let's talk a little bit about the modern part. Let's say, how did the Lovato Jiu-Jitsu, now the figure of Rafael Lovato Junior, you know, how did that came about? You have your first school, your second school, third school, and then life came about, and you end up moving away from that role. Can you tell us the chronology of events?
Yeah. Well, I was teaching. We were doing really well. We finally, after several years, started really making a name for ourselves, and it was very much because of Rafael Junior. He was doing so well in competition, and we were gaining quite a notice here in Oklahoma City. The Daily Oklahoman did an article on us. I'd been on radio, I'd been on television, and then of course Rafael he's tapping people out all over the country. And then by this time, has made his first trip to Brazil, and but it was
now imagine, okay,
yes,
his version of Chicago was going to Brazil as a gringo, okay, and sorry to say that word. I have always someone that I have always respected, some, like, you know, of course today is a bit different, but I'll tell you something, man. You go to Brazil as a 16-year-old boy, you know, they not gonna care for you.
No.
You know what I mean? They just gonna be like, you're a gringo, stay there, we're not gonna teach you. You know what I mean? What I can gather from especially Carlos, which I have mad respect, that he really, because I remember the first time training with you and training with Rafael, they knew Jiu-Jitsu. You guys really knew Jiu-Jitsu. That was difficult. Of course, you know, our Jiu-Jitsu, you know, we're champions at the time, Sal and I, but like a lot of times I would come and visit some schools. I just had a feeling that people didn't really teach people. You know what I mean? And I was very sad with that. You know, I was very upset at it, that like people are not really teaching, right? There was a whole, look at the passion, right? So you went, you did private lessons, you were eager to do something.
Yes.
You could be taken advantage of, you know? But now you have your son going to Brazil, and the version, like, I think in Brazil, I don't think he's much of a bully, but there's like, because I did that to Rafael until we had a conversation, hey man, can you stop? Because we Brazilians, we have a thing that once we go, we don't stop. You know, we're gonna poke you until you cry. But some, like, a lot of, like, when there's a friendship, we don't mean it, but some people do mean that, you know what I mean? So
Yes.
I think that was very powerful for you to support that, right? Because that was a moment, how How was when Rafael, I think he told you he doesn't want to go to college, he want to do jiu-jitsu. You as a
Yes.
father, which probably there's a lot of fathers watching us right now, especially with the evolution of jiu-jitsu today, which I think your decision was way harder than the modern jiu-jitsu because I always tell people, we live the dream. Like, that was only faith. Well, maybe there's something after that door. And you worked hard, you built a school. I came to America, there was no such thing as the industry of jiu-jitsu. You know, now there's a career path.
Oh, yes.
There's tournaments give you hundreds
Yes.
of thousands of dollars.
Yes.
So just to inspire our parents here in our channel, how was that decision? You know, what made you feel like, you know what, I had a feeling that it's the right thing to take my kid out of school or whatever he was gonna move after. Because my mom, she was like, you gotta go to school, you gotta get a degree, you gotta do all of that. Now you have someone just picking up, especially in Brazil. Imagine in Brazil if I would say, hey, I wanna go live of jiu-jitsu, they're gonna think I'm gonna die starving. You know, how was that? You know, how was you as a father take the faith not just in your son, but also that could be something one day which turned out to be great today?
It was tough in the beginning because a lot of people don't know that Rafael did remarkably well in school. He graduated, in fact, with the highest GPA in his school.
Oh, wow.
He, in fact, he would have. The only reason why he wasn't chosen as valedictorian is because I think he missed one question
Valedictorian?
on the SAT test.
Okay.
Valedictorian is when you give a speech, a presentation to the entire school.
Oh, wow.
But Rafael had an academic scholarship to OU, the University of Oklahoma.
Which is one of the greatest
Yes.
schools in the country.
And so he did go for a semester to OU, and he was just miserable because he wanted to train. And finally, he talked to me, says, Dad, I feel like I really can do well. I want to pursue jiu-jitsu. And it was tough because I wanted to see him get his degree, and I knew he could succeed at whatever he did. But because he was so passionate and persistent about it, I said, okay, go ahead and pursue it. Do it while you're young. And of course, he went on to make so much history. And of course, the first time he went to Brazil, the first several times, it was pretty rough. But it was because of you and your brother that you know, meeting you guys. And for the first time he went to Brazil, when it was actually treated with respect, taught. It wasn't just ruthlessly beaten up, but was actually regarded as would turn out to be a future world champion. And so that changed everything. So in the beginning it was tough, but then I saw he had the potential to really succeed, and so I supported him.
That's a curious question now. How was the first time you found out about the Ribeiro brothers?
Well, we had heard of Saulo, and I remember, and Saulo back in the day was just, oh my goodness, he seemed like this unbeatable force of jiu-jitsu. But I remember seeing you in a competition years ago against Todd Margolis.
Yeah.
He sang to you.
Yeah.
He sang.
Let's get it on.
Yes.
Were you there?
No, I wasn't there. I
But
saw
you
it on
heard of it.
video.
Okay.
And
Yeah, that story is funny because Saul was supposed. That's how my ADCC story started. Let's open a parenthesis. So, I was already in Ohio, living in Ohio. So my brother was training. He had an appendix burst. So he calls me 10 days before. Say, hey, I'm not gonna compete. You gotta go.
oh my goodness.
So I had in my bracket Tor Margolis first match, Popovich second match, and then Jeff Monson in final. And that's what got me to compete at ECC.
How about that? I did not know that.
Yeah.
But I remember back then seeing you for the first time. You had hair.
Yeah.
And I remember watching and thinking, man, these guys are really good. Then, of course, the big story was at the Arnold's in Ohio. Rafael actually competed against Saulo. This is before we'd heard about you, but Rafael told me the story later on when him and Saulo were on different sides of the brackets, and it came down to them, and Rafael had tapped out Hedges, and Hedges was a little upset about it, and but Rafael told me he was really intimidated because he was going to compete against Saulo, and he just tapped out one of his black belts.
Yeah, I got intimidated by just walking in the same room as Saulo. Imagine competing against him.
But I remember the story was Saulo was so impressed with Rafael because Rafael was only 18 or 19 at the time at brown belt, and
We have
Saulo.
that picture.
Salo gave him his rash guard
Yeah.
and told him next time, gave him his number and everything, and next time you come to Brazil, you call me. And sure enough, Rafael did. Hey, I'm coming to Brazil. Salo actually sent some students to pick up Rafael at the airport, took him to the school. Salo introduced him, made a big presentation. Everybody came and shook his hand, and Rafael was like, oh man, finally, finally, they're treating me with some respect, some friendliness and courtesy. And now, Rafael's mother and I kid all the times. It's like we have two Brazilian boys. We got Rafael, we have you. But Rafael is he's so familiar with Brazil. He actually lived there for about 6 months.
Yeah, I was there.
And then
that's when our friendship really picked up.
blossomed. Yeah.
Yeah, it was kind of odd. Like we're training a lot, but we didn't really socialize much because he was in Barra, and I had a girlfriend at the time. I was recovering from but Rafael was a very important figure for me because we trained a lot. Like we didn't got to maybe because I don't know, I had a girlfriend at the time and I just wanted to train, go home, and he was very shy. Rafael is very shy.
Yes, he is.
Like Rafael is the type of person you need to open up to him and then he opens to you. But I trained so much. The Brasileiro 2004 that I won, I trained so much with him. I would get him because he was very similar to Jefferson, and I say, okay, do the sweep that Jefferson does, and I kept, doing the technique all the time on him, and I really didn't win. I tell this with a lot of pride. I didn't really win until Rafael and I were together because I struggled. There's a lot of backstories on it, but 2004 was definitely separate the waters. That's when you guys decided to join Ribeiro Jiu-Jitsu after that, right?
Yes. Salo was very gracious, and when Rafael came back from Brazil, he says, "Dad, I really think we need to go with the Ribeiros," and at that time,
and that says a lot because which I still like. For me, I'll train anyone that I feel that there's a passion. And at the time, the Lovatos, they represented Machado Jiu-Jitsu.
Yes.
And then of course Rafael wanted to, because the Machado's never really been a competition academy either. So I think that I would say that kind of that transference to represent us, came with a lot of respect because I was very
And the thing is, at the time, Carlos got married, and man, they were having babies already right away. And Salo also said, talk to Professor Machado, talk to him. Don't just do this. You talk to him, and I respected that about Salo. And I did talk to Carlos, and I said, look, I have nothing but respect for you, but I believe Rafael has so much potential, and Salo and you were able to travel with Rafael because you guys were also competing. So we saw the difference, and once we made that move, here again, nothing against the Machado brothers. I have nothing but respect for them, but I saw the change in Rafael's game. I felt like with myself even that our game just went from at a whole nother level.
Well, it's not even that. Like just going back to the cultural thing of appropriation of a student, right? I think what happened, Rafael wanted to follow a path.
Yes.
Right? That I want to compete, I want to do BJJ, and we were there. I was coming up as a champion. Saul was ending his career as a champion, so I think it just made sense. Right, but I think even today, you do seminars for Carlos Machado, so that says a lot. Even you, Rafael is very big into competition and students, and you teach a lot of self-defense and vale tudo. It's totally fine. You know what I mean? I think it would be a problem if they had a team and we had a team. I think that could be a little thing. And of course, to end in the best note that we can talk about, the first father and son black belts of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in America, right?
Yes.
So right before, of course, I actually remember Carlos talking to Saulo. There was something about it. So when Rafael got his black belt, right? Machado, on the Carlos.
Yes.
So that's when, then we came in 2005. And then it's all history. Of course, soon we're going to have Rafael Junior here, and then he can kind of piggyback in that story and kind of go on this. So, of course, a couple years ago, life came about, and then you stepped away. So, what is going on with you right now? You're teaching, you're keeping the legacy alive of Vale Tudo. We have a couple projects with Six Blades, and I can see your passion for it. And let's talk a little bit about this before we finish. What's happening to Papa Lovato nowadays?
Well, I'm very happy to say that I am still very active in teaching. I teach twice a month in Garden City, Kansas, at one of our good students and friends, Ty Brookover's place, and I teach seminars all over. I've taught in Europe, I've taught in Canada, all over the U.S., and I'm having a great time. And these days, my wife Cindy gets to travel with me most of the time, so we get to spend that time together. And as far as my training goes, I'm still on the mat. I don't know if a lot of people know this, but I did have a heart attack some years ago, and that was why we decided to turn the school over to Rafael. I could see that he was really passionate about it, and him and his mother talked to me about, hey, slow down a little bit, take it easy. And Rafael is just taking it to a whole nother level, and he's doing a phenomenal job. But I still try to get on the mat whenever I can. I know that you and I try to train whenever you're in town.
How old are you now, Papa?
I'm 67.
67
years old.
Pressure.
But
when that guy puts the pressure on, I cannot move. He gets little old school pass on me, and I have to bring my youth, because if I let Papa put the pressure on, it's unbelievable.
Well, the thing is, these days I tell people I teach GBJJ, Geriatric Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, because at 67, I can't do what I used to do. I can't move like I used to. I have some limitations, but I modified a lot of the techniques. And some things like what you do, I love your game. In fact, I've adapted your game very much, especially with the knee shield, because I find that it works very, very well for me. And some of the modifications that I made in techniques has worked really well. And even with some of my students that are younger and faster, more athletic, they really like it. I've had a number of students that I've taught around the country that they write to me and they tell me, hey, I won this IBJJF event because of what you showed me, or because of this little thing that you do, or this modification and technique. So that's a great affirmation of what I'm doing. And then, I'm happy, like for my 67th birthday, Rafael got me on the mat. We trained and had a lot of fun.
67 rounds?
Yeah. But I just thank God every day, and I mean that sincerely, that I'm still in shape that I am. Just yesterday, in fact, I had to see my heart doctor, and he says, hey, keep doing what you're doing. You're in phenomenal shape, for my age, and considering the fact that I had a heart attack. And so I'm just plugging along.
I'm gonna reiterate the GBJJ that he's talking about. I just like to say the greatest Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, because it's great to know that the efficiency of what we do, that's what's important.
Yes.
You know what I mean? That like Lovato, we came out with the timeless Jiu-Jitsu. So which is interesting, that you have to even say this, like, oh, now that I'm older, because for me, Jiu-Jitsu is about being efficient. I don't think my Jiu-Jitsu will change so much from what I am to now than whatever day I decide to lay down flat. But this is what Jiu-Jitsu is. This is turning into the efficient ways to move. And I gotta go back, if you think about it, you did a seminar in my school, and I still to the day defend lasso, which is a very modern,
yeah, I remember,
which is a very modern technique per se. I still use your concept. You know what I mean? And of course, sometimes I do, do things more athletic, because Jiu-Jitsu starts when athleticism ends. You know what I mean? That's the pure Jiu-Jitsu.
Yes.
If there's a lot of athleticism, of course, maybe if you take away athleticism, you can't win, right? But I'm talking about the pure form of the art. You know what I mean? And I'm very curious, how am I going to see you? Because I think I see Jiu-Jitsu today way more efficiently than I did back in the day. Like if I could transport my knowledge, my spirit, and my energy that I have now to my 25-year-old self, I don't think I'll ever lose. And that's impressive. So.
Well, you rarely ever lost as it is.
Well, yeah, just as guys called Roger and Pajipanas.
Yeah, but I was there when you beat Roger too.
Yeah,
I was there. I remember that.
I tried. Papa, thank you so much.
Oh, thank you.
That was a very great conversation. I'm loving this show you talked there. I got to
awesome.
Play a little. I am a fan. We're family. We're here in his house, as you know. You really like medieval.
Oh, I love it. Yeah. I spent so much time in Europe, and I love that style.
Yeah.
I have my armor there from Italy, and my axes and everything else.
Yeah. So what we're gonna do is this. It's a little impromptu. we're gonna finish our interview, and I'm gonna show. Is that okay if I show a
Of
little
course,
bit?
of course.
What we're gonna do? We're gonna just show his passion for the medievals, and then thank you so much for tuning in. Until the next one.
Thank you, guys.
So a little piece of history here. So what do we have here, Papa?
This couple of my prized possessions, this is actually signed by the great Jack Dempsey, heavyweight champion. This is back from 1965, well after he'd already retired. But this was given to me as a gift. And then I have here, also given to me as a gift, one of Bruce Lee's original business cards from the 1960s. Richard Bustillo gave me this.
Of course. Jiu-Jitsu University.
Yeah, of course.
Keeping the
Gotta have that.
Taekwondo,
Yes.
you know.
Yes.
The tree, of course, things that we don't see much, an actual library. You know, back in the day, we had to go through the books to
Yes.
figure out what we do.
And I do read.
You know, the Crusades, the Great... Wow.
I read
Plato.
consistently. I have a collection there of the great philosophers.
Is this the one?
Yes, that's all the great philosophers there.
Oh, wow. Which one you would recommend me to start with?
Kierkegaard.
Oh, that's different. I thought we were going to say Plato or
No,
Aristotle. or something.
Kierkegaard.
All right, so here you are.
And oh yeah,
Of course, little Lovatito right there. He's gonna kill me for showing this
Raphael
picture.
when he was a young man. My suit of armor from Italy, and it's
How did you get this thing here?
no, actually I had it shipped in.
Oh wow. That's
Let me move this.
España. More books, of course. The man,
Yes.
Hickson Gracie. Dude, I love this. It's like I'm like in East Spain right now, just like, you know.
Here's back years ago when I had when I had hair.
Oh, you tell me that I had it.
This is actually Bruce Lee's punching bag, famous 400-pound
From
punching
that
bag.
from that scene, right?
That yes, and that's at the old IMB Academy in Torrance, California. Richard Bustillo had all of Bruce's old equipment. It was a poem that Raphael actually wrote to me years ago. Some pictures of he and I training and goofing off.
When you and me are grappling, I am always tapping. There's nothing I can do.
Not anymore.
Yeah, you know, they grow up, right? And I feel, of course, the music passion.
This is kind of neat. This is an award I was given by the Oklahoma City Police Department. I'd worked with them for many years in their custody and control and defensive tactics, and they gave me this award some years ago.
Boy, all right. All right, guys, here's a little bit of piece of history. You know, so happy to be able to, every time come to Oklahoma, share now. You guys know all the love and passion that this man has taught us always. All right. Thank you, guys.
Ciao.
Ciao.